So again, good morning to everybody, and we'll try to make this productive for you. Let me kind of set the stage for what's going on as far as Revit and Newforma, and then some of those benefits of this process. So BIM, building information modeling, part of that acronym is information, and we know within a Revit model there are lots and lots of data points. It's just a lot of information. And what Newforma has done is provided a means to get data out of a Revit model and bring it into Newforma Project Center. So essentially there's a handshake that's going to happen between Revit and Newforma. Technically, it's an integration between the two, but just think about the two connect up, and I'm going to show you how to do that. There are a few places in Newforma where this Revit data is going to end up, and so what I'm going to do is go ahead and open up a project and point out some of the activity centers that are going to receive data as a result of talking to Revit. So one of those is this activity center that you see, document control. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. It's empty at the moment, but what I'm going to be able to do is I'm going to be able to push sheets from the Revit model to populate document control. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, there's a couple of reasons, and it's based on the way document control fits into the Newforma world. The document control activity center is a place where if I link up, or in this case, push drawing sheets from the Revit model into document control, I'll be able to share those sheets to the Newforma Info Exchange website. So I don't know how many of you have actually logged into the website, but that website can be accessed by not only you as internal people, but also external people. So if I wanted to push, let's say, bid sets of documents out to the website for external parties to be able to access those, the first step in doing that is to populate items here to document control. Another place that document control fits in is with our mobile apps. I don't know how many of you have used the mobile apps to date, but one of those mobile apps is the Plans app. Only works on an iPad, but if I have populated documents to document control, I would be able to go into the field with my iPad and open up the drawing sheets that exist here in document control. And in the field from that Plans app, in relation to a place on a drawing sheet, I can create punch list items, action items, or field notes, which the field notes roll back up into site visit reports. So again, that's the first step to get that going. Now, I mentioned punch list in relation to that Plans app, but if I go back to my project home, I wanted to point out that there's also another activity center here called Spatial Index. So the space data that exists in the Revit model can be pushed to populate the Spatial Index activity center, which will make the creation of punch list items in the field very easy, because then I'll be able to select from a list the room number of where that punch list item exists. And when creating a punch list item, if you were to link 3 different locations, let's say that you had gypsum board that needed some repair in 3 different rooms, if you put 3 room numbers on one punch list item, you create 3 separate punch list items. So the spatial index holds that space-related data. So again, thinking in terms of this data already exists in a Revit model, how can we grab that data and then bring it into our normal everyday workflow of what we're going to do without having to duplicate some effort? There's a lot of value, I think, in that. It saves a lot of time. Before I dive into the meat of the presentation, were there any questions? I just wanted to try to set the stage for you on the front end, and now we'll look at some details. Okay, sounds quiet. So here we go. I'm in Newforma Project Center. I'm going up on this toolbar up at the very top. Hopefully you can see my mouse kind of hovering around here. And if I hover over this button on the toolbar, it's labeled Preferences. So by selecting Preferences, I just come down to the bottom of this list where it says Preferences again. And on this box, what I'm looking for is this section called Newforma Project Information Link, and just enabling the Revit installation. Now for the computer that I'm working on, I have multiple versions of Revit. So I have selected Revit Architecture 2015 by checking the box, and I'm just going to say okay. So this step is what's causing that handshake to happen. So in the background, Newforma and Revit are going to connect, and that's going to allow me to push data to populate these different activity centers. So I'll just say okay at that point. So that's step one.
Go ahead.
Hey, I'm sorry.
Rick, we got a question over here in Tampa.
Can you just point out again where you went on the toolbar to find that to enable?
Under
Yeah.
Preferences.
Preferences?
Yeah.
This little gearbox.
And then,
It's the bottom. Preferences and Preferences.
so you clicked on Preferences and you went to
Preferences.
Preferences.
Yep.
Okay.
And then it's just this.
Click Revit.
It's just a checkbox. So what that means is, does the computer you're working on have Revit installed? And I do. If you don't have Revit installed, you're not going to see this, so you wouldn't be able to complete this operation. So it means that you'd have to get on a machine that does have Revit in order to populate this data to a particular project. From here, I'm going to work in this building information management section in Newforma. So just in case, your screen might look like this, where these items have actually been closed off. You may have never looked in there, but just go ahead and click next to that, and that will expand that view. And I'm going to go into the building models and elements. So from here, there's really just one thing that I'm going to do. I'm going to come over to this task area over here in the upper right, the green bar, and within there is a command to register the model. Now I have already registered a model, so you can see it here in my log, but all you have to do here is select that link, and you can give the model a name. It can be whatever name you want it to be. The actual model file itself is linked up by clicking this box that has the 3 dots on it, and then I will navigate out to wherever that particular model happens to be stored and just link it up. So I get the ability to navigate through my Windows Network folder structure to get to that particular model to pull it in. So once I've accomplished that, I would just say OK. And as you can see, I've already performed that step, and I have my model already linked up, or I've registered it to this point. Now from here, because I could have
Hey, Rick?
Yes.
It's Charlie. I want to mention here to everybody, not all the Revit paths are in every project. So I mentioned this before. If you have a project in Newforma that doesn't have its Revit path in it, you got to let me know, and we'll get Revit, we'll get the R drive path in that model so that it's easier to navigate to that link. All right, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Charlie. So from here, I'm going to, and I'm just working in Project Center still. I've got my model registered. It knows where to find it. And from here, I do have a link to open that model with Autodesk Revit. So I'm going to go ahead and click. And I get a dialog box here. There's some different options. I always just pick proceed to open the selected Revit project file. And if that's not going to work in your case, then we'll look at individually what we might do there. But now I'm just going to wait for the beast to load up. It doesn't take too long, but just give it a few seconds here. I just kind of wanted you to see in real time what's going on. But those of you who work with Revit on a regular basis know that it doesn't just pop open as soon as you click the button. Okay, so here we go. So here's Revit. Now if I look up on the tab structure, you know, it starts over here, architecture, and then if I just come all the way across, we now have a tab labeled Newforma. So that's that handshake, that project information link that we checked that box that caused Newforma and Revit to start communicating. Now I'm going to focus right here on the different buttons that you see, and some of them are grayed out at this point. What I'm going to do in just a moment is click this button to connect. But before I connect, I just want to focus on one thing. Here's document control. Now I pointed that out as an activity center that exists in Newforma Project Center. If I go ahead and click on document control, there's only one option here that is currently active. Once I do connect to the actual model, or I should say to Newforma, I'm going to get this other option to synchronize and add revisions will become active. But in this particular step, if I click on Publish Sheets to PDF, all I'm really doing at this stage is just presented with a way to publish the sheets from the model. So you have all of the sheets that are currently residing in the model. I can come in and do a master pick up at the top, or I can uncheck that and then just pick a couple of these. You've got a PDF driver. Newforma has its own PDF driver, so it's kind of defaulted to that. And you've got this option down here to combine selected sheets into one PDF. Well, that's not checked. And that's kind of going to be my option to not have a combined PDF for this reason. The Plans app that I mentioned to you earlier, if you've got a combined PDF, you can view that from your iPad in the field without any problems. But that Plans app does provide a means for you to be able to mark up the PDF sheet in the field. That markup capability is only possible on a single page PDF. So if marking up sheets in the field is going to be something that's important to you, then you probably want to make sure that the PDF that you're creating is going to be a single page format. And I'm just kind of using this window to get you familiar with a few things that we'll look at. There's a little bit of duplication as we go through here, but there is this option for publish settings. And when I navigate over to here, it's asking me to specify a location of where I'm going to publish these sheets to. So this is just a step all on its own that's going to allow me to publish the sheets from the Revit model out to the network drive somewhere. At this stage, I'm not doing anything as far as pushing this data to Newforma. This is basically just a print driver where I can come in and push these files to a network location. And in this lower section, the sheet names, or the file name, is going to be a combination of sheet number, project name, sheet name, current revision number. Now, there is the ability to modify what that file name is going to be. And if I look at this drop-down list that I see here, here are some other parameters or properties that I could choose. And then if I happen to highlight one of those, then I get this ability to insert that into this particular file name. So wherever I happen to have my cursor at the time I click that insert, then that's what these names are going to become. That's the individual sheet PDF file names, but if I'm doing a combined sheet PDF file name, same process. You've got these properties up at the top, but you can go ahead and choose additional properties to insert into what will become that file name for that particular file. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of here. Now I'm going to go back and click on the connect button. That is going to activate the rest of these buttons that we can work with. Now if I go back to document control, not only is the publish sheets active, but these other options are active, and I'm going to focus on synchronize and add revisions. So I'm just letting that screen catch up. So looking up at the top of this screen, it's prompting me select the properties to synchronize. So what are we syncing? Well, we're going to sync a Revit parameter to a Newforma property. So property being a data field within Newforma. Revit calls them parameters, Newforma calls it a property. Now there are 4 required elements here that have to exist at a minimum, but I can choose additional items to synchronize. And so this list at the top is showing me what will be synchronized from the model to Newforma. And then this area here in the lower part of the screen shows me, or gives me kind of a worksheet to pick which files I'm going to actually synchronize. So I could come over here and click that master checkbox at the top and select everything. But if all I wanted to do was, bring in the civil sheets, then I could come over here in this particular box and type a C and isolate my civil sheets, and then go ahead and pick those to sync up to the Document Control Activity Center. Now, just a little bit of a technical point here. create Newforma record document. So when you add sheets to the document control, those are known as record documents. So you may come across this term record document, and it's just a differentiation to say that what does exist in document control is what we call a record document. Now, these parameters that you see up here at the top, these properties that we're choosing to synchronize, this is something that you can modify. If I come over to the upper right, there's an option to sync settings. And up at the top, we see the Revit parameters that exist. And then in the lower section, we see the Newforma properties. So from here, if I wanted to push additional data, then I could go ahead and create those additional items. Now, I'm just kind of highlighting here to show you currently the required items that I talked about a moment ago. Those are already mapped up. We see in this lower part of the screen, sheet name. And again, there's this process of kind of connecting the dots between Revit and Newforma. So for instance, if I were to take one of these Revit parameters and click on it and drag it, I could bring it down here and drop it, and that is going to create that relationship between those two fields of data. Now, I've highlighted that particular item. If I come over to this button mapping behavior, what I'm going to see is that in this particular instance, there is only a push from Revit to Newforma. So in some of these possible combinations that you have, you can have it to where it can only go from Revit to Newforma, or from Newforma to Revit, or you have an option of picking either one of those. So that determines which direction that data goes. So it's possible to update data in the model as a result of a push from Newforma. So on this particular item that I went ahead and did the drag and drop, I'm going to go ahead and just remove that. But before I do, I'm going to say OK. And if I come over, you can see that I've got this additional item here. So now I've got 6 properties that are going to sync up because I had went ahead and created that other one, that 6th one, by doing the drag and drop. So if I don't want one of these parameters, I come back into here and highlight it, and I can remove it. Now that only applies to those that are not required. The required ones are going to have to stay in place. So this is just basically the sync settings. Lets me determine what's going to show up in Newforma as a result of the push from Revit. At this stage, I can go ahead and synchronize and add revisions. So I have this button here at the bottom, and it's going to go ahead and tick through taking those sheets from Revit and going ahead and populating them into the Document Control Activity Center for this particular project. So it's going to take a few seconds here for this to happen. If I'm going to push 400 or 500 sheets, it might take 20 minutes or so. But this shouldn't take much longer. while that's finishing up, notice that down here in the bottom left corner, there is a Publish Settings button. I had clicked on that previously, and that's where you could set locations for where files are going to be backed up to. It's just those same settings that we saw when we did the first print driver look. So this is what I'm looking for. Synchronization has completed. There were no errors or warnings. And if there were any errors here, when I clicked OK, it would go ahead and show me what errors existed. Now, what's an example of an error? Well, you know, maybe there's just the matching up of, maybe you created some sync settings and the data just didn't push. Maybe it's, you know, just something that you could investigate and look at, but it doesn't stop the push from happening. It just lets you know that there were a couple of errors in case you've mapped a field that there was no data in that particular field. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. And so if I go back to Newforma Project Center and I go back to my project home and I choose Document Control, there are the civil sheets that I did the push to get them here. So I was able to take just the civil sheets from the Revit model and populate Document Control. Now, I had mentioned earlier that you can go onto the Info Exchange website and see these sheets. They're called record documents. And as an internal user, you don't have any problems. They're out there. Log into the website, you can see them. If you wanted an external person, you know, talking about maybe pushing out some bid type documents, you're going to have to do another step here. So notice in the revision state, these are all set to draft. Now in a draft mode, you can see these in the Plans app. So I'm kind of talking in parallel here. A Plans app, Newforma Info Exchange website. As an internal user, you're good for either of those situations, the website and the Plans app. Again, external users will not see these in the Info Exchange website or in the Plans app until these files are issued. So all I have to do is come in and select these sheets and then come over to this task area, and from here I have an option to issue the selected record documents. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and what's really happening here is the issuance of these is being accomplished through the Info Exchange transfer process. So because we're now pushing these sheets out to the Info Exchange website for external people to be able to view them, I'm going to go ahead and in the To area list that these are going to Bob Welder. But if I issue them to Bob, they're considered issued. So I don't have to issue them to everybody for them to be viewable by external people, just at least one person. So I'll go ahead and satisfy the required field here on the subject, and then I'll go ahead and create and transfer. So again, this is no different than any Info Exchange file transfer that you do. All the parameters and settings work just the same. And having completed that, if I now go back and look at my document control area, the revision state for these items is now issued. So an external user could now log into the Info Exchange website And this is dependent on that person being a project team member and having access to the website. They would be able to see these files and download them to their desktop. So this just saves so much time, getting that sheet data out of the model and into document control, into Project Center, so you can share them either to the website, or now if I opened up my Plans app on the iPad, I would be able to open up these files and again, create a punch list item, an action item, or a field note out in the field. Okay, so any questions at this stage? Okay.
Is there a way to publish from within AutoCAD? I know this is isolated to Revit, but we have many projects that are still done in AutoCAD. Just wanted to ask that question, since when you went to the preferences, I did see that there was a link to download the exporters for AutoCAD.
That's a good question, and personally, I haven't done it myself, but let me look into that and see if there's any way to be able to populate and what that process looks like. You'd like to be able to do the same thing to populate this from AutoCAD. Okay, so let me investigate that for you. I'll get an answer back to Charlie. Thank you. So I'm going to go back to the Revit model, and the next item I'm going to mention is the Spatial Index. So from here, I have the option to synchronize spaces. So that space data that exists in the model, I am going to push it to Newforma. So again, just to connect the dots, here's the Spatial Index Activity Center that's inside of Building Information Management. And when I come over here and look, my log is empty. Of course, I could come over here and manually enter this information. I can even import it from a spreadsheet. But why do that when all that data already exists within the model? And the big benefit here of using this space data is when it comes to creating punch list items, which I've been talking about the Plans app as a way to do that, but the Capture app in Newforma allows you to create punch list items, action items, and field notes, just like the Plans app. The difference being the Capture app does that without needing to have a drawing sheet as a reference. The Plans app is using that drawing sheet as a reference. So I'm going to go ahead and select to synchronize the spaces. So again, you have properties up here at the top, and then you have that sync setting. So that's very similar to what we looked at previously. What do I want to sync up to Newforma? And then down in this lower area, select the items to synchronize. I have 177 different space items that exist in the model, and I'm going to go ahead and click the Synchronize button. So that's going to take all that data and go ahead and push it. Now here's an example of this log, this synchronization log that pops open, and it says, okay, failed to assign a parameter value, room target, a room area target, room area target delta. Those were two specific properties that existed up here. So no data was there, so nothing got synced up. I could have unchecked these if I had known, and I did know that this was going to happen, and then I wouldn't have gotten these errors because there's no data associated with that. So I'll go ahead and just close out that particular log. And now if I go back to Project Center, and the screen's just kind of been sitting there in the background while that integration happened. There's a button right up here on the toolbar that lets you do a refresh. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And so now here are all of those spaces that just came over in the model. And again, if I were to, if I'm out in the field trying to create some punch list items using either the Capture app or the Plans app, I'm going to have all of these locations to select from. So I don't have to type any of that data in. I'll just go to a drop-down list, scroll through the list, pick that value, and then it'll populate that field for that particular item that I'm creating. Any questions here? Okay, so I'm going to move over to this next item, the building elements. So you can actually synchronize your elements to Newforma. Now this takes just a little while here to generate the list because there's quite a few of them. Let me go back. It flipped me out of my Revit model. Here we go. So synchronize building elements. So again, we work off of this. What properties do you want to actually sync up? So here are the sync settings that we looked at. This exists in all these different locations to be able to modify what you're syncing up. And then here are the items down here that we can then select which items we want to synchronize with the model. And then we can go ahead and synchronize that information. Now, if I go back over to Newforma Project Center, I'm going to go back to where I registered the model, because notice it says building models and elements. And the key here, this was the model that I registered, and then I opened it with Revit. But if you look up in this filter at the top, here's where you see the elements for the model. So there are over 15,000 elements in that particular model. So when I go ahead and select that as the filter, then I can see whatever data I pushed from Revit to populate this area. So the key here is in this category area, you've got this little funnel item. So here are the different categories of these Revit items. So if I wanted to come in here and just look at a particular category, I could filter off of that list. And I think in this case, I don't have any piping in this one. Let me go back. I'll do another one here. Let's just do doors. There we go. So now I'm grouped up on just the doors, and you can see those items. And if I scroll all the way over, there are some different fields here depending upon, whether that's populated or not. It has to do with that push. But in this gray bar, the column header, this is typical throughout Newforma Project Center. If I right click anywhere in this column header, here are the fields that will display within this particular activity center, and you can click on those or click off on those to see that information. So that shows you all of that building element data. Now there's a couple of other items here, action items and markup sessions. So before I jump into that, let me go back over to Newforma and just make you aware of a couple of things. Here is an action item activity center. Anybody currently using action items?
Yes.
So just for the benefit of the group, how are you using those today?
Using them to let our consultants know and our clients know information that we are requesting, or to provide tasks for team members to accomplish.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. And I'm just going to click on action item for the benefit of those who haven't seen them. There is an option here to identify an action item, and then here's the box that I fill out with all those different things that were just mentioned. And if you do assign to here, there's a place to pull in a person's name, and this box is checked here at the bottom to send a change notification email. When I put in the required information up here and click create, that's going to allow me to send a action item out to that individual. However, this could be an action item for my own benefit. I may choose to create kind of that to-do list for myself through the creation of an action item. What we're going to have the ability to do from Revit is to identify an element in a Revit model and create an action item, and the two are going to be associated. The element and the action item have an association. So maybe in looking at a model, if I see something in the model that I wanted to point out to someone, or maybe there needs to be an add or a delete from the model, I could use this action item to catalog that, just to make it easy to track that. So instead of, maybe doing that by email or whatever your current process is for doing that, Newforma lets me capture action items. And this type of action item that you see here is something that when I bring that in and tag this action item with one of these values, makes it easy for me to sort, filter, and report off of these particular items. And under type, this is typical of what we would call a keywords list in Newforma. If you need some additional values here, they can be added by an administrator. So if I wanted to put something in here that said model and make some reference, model add, model delete, or whatever I might want to do here, that would make it easy for me to pull up this list a little later. So that's just a little bit about what action items allows. Action items can show up on the Info Exchange website. And while we're on the subject of action items, let me just mention one other thing. Some of you that are using this may already know this, but there's actually an element. Yes.
I ask you a question. Could you go quickly through the process of assigning an action item to an element?
Yeah, I'm going to jump right to that. That's my next step. So the discussion tab that you see here has a conversational element to it, to where you can add a discussion point. So actually parties to this particular action item can have a conversation here that gets documented in this action item through this discussion element. And that is possible through the website as well. So if I jump back into the Revit model, I'm running slow here, because give me just a second for it to catch up. So wherever I happen to be in the model, I can go over and go back to my Newforma area, go to action items, and identify an action item for an element. So if I go ahead and choose that particular option, it will go ahead and pop open the action, identify action item. Now in this case it chose topography subregion, but if I just go ahead and close that out, let me go back over to the Revit area. If I come into the model and go ahead and highlight a particular element, and then I'm going to go back to Newforma, action items, and then choose identify for an element, what it does in the subject line is it puts in the name for that particular element. So it's really just a matter of highlighting that element and then selecting from the menu. Something else that you're able to do from the model is to, if I happen to be in a sheet view, I can do the same thing. Well, these civil sheets I have in here, they don't have a lot of data in them. I've got them in here just to make it easy to demonstrate this without taking too long to do that. And my virtual machine's running a little slow this morning, so bear with me. Yeah, I've got some sheets in here that are just blanks. So again, action items, identify for the element. Now, if I were to go into drafting mode and just maybe do a rectangle and drag it out around a particular area on a model, I could highlight that box, that drafting element, and then do the same thing, identify for that element. So versus choosing an element that already exists, or maybe just highlighting an area with a rectangle or square and then using that square or rectangle as the element to call out where that particular item is located, I can do either one of those. So again, the benefit of that is whatever I'm trying to communicate gets now logged in this action item area, with that ability for me to have assigned that to someone and to have notified them, and then from there they can take the appropriate action on the model. Now this other area that I haven't talked about yet is Markup Sessions. Now this is going to really reflect back to the Newforma viewer. So if I go back into Newforma, and I'm just going to try to paint the picture in case you haven't used this feature before. Let's say that I happen to be in my project files. This is Windows Network area, and I had found a PDF here, and if I right-click on the PDF, I have this option to open it with the Newforma viewer. So the Newforma viewer is already installed on your computer. Nothing you have to do here, but what it does is it will open up a PDF, and from here I have this ability to go in and do markups on a particular document. And in creating these markups, I can just do the markup just so I can PDF or send this out to somebody, or I have the ability to save whatever the markup is to this particular document. So whatever markup I've put on here, I've got this ability to either save that markup, which becomes basically a transparency overlay. It doesn't change the original file, or I have this option to send a snapshot of the current view. So if I choose send a snapshot, that's going to take this document and the associated markup and drop it into an email with that drawing area attached to the email. So I wanted to go ahead and show you that that functionality already exists through the Newforma viewer. And when it comes to the Revit side of it, the option that I'm going to have is going to be to use those same markup sessions to create a similar type of item. So let me get this teed up here just a moment. So if I go over to my markup sessions, then I have this option to send a snapshot. So snapshot was that ability to send a view in an email. So if I go ahead and choose send snapshot, so it's prompted me to come down here and select a portion of this particular model, which I did go ahead and do that, and it went ahead and popped up an email with this snapshot attached as a PNG file. So that's a universal file format that everybody should be able to see. So that snapshot of that image is now in that particular email, and all I have to do is address that to someone and click send. Or probably I would want to click send and file in project, since this relates to a particular project, and that'll go ahead and do that filing to Newforma for me automatically. So now if I go back to this same markup sessions area, then I have an option to mark up a snapshot. So the send snapshot just let me basically focus in on a portion of the model by dragging that box, puts it in the email, off it goes. If I come in and choose markup snapshot, then I can come in and pick another area from the model, and from here it opens up the Newforma viewer, and then from here I've got the ability to mark up that particular piece of the model and save that markup, or use this ability to send it to someone with the markups. So there's just some different variations off of what you can do, but it in this case ties back to the Newforma viewer. The last option a markup snapshot of an element. So if I choose that option, then it brings me in where I can still zoom on a particular item. And again, it's going to launch it, populate it into the viewer for me to go ahead and do a markup there. So that's these different touch points or areas where that Revit data can be pushed into or through Newforma to communicate what you need to for the different parts of that model. Any questions?
Yes.
I have a couple of questions. Is there a significant increase to the model file size when you link it to Newforma? And the other question is there the possibility of deleting elements of the model through Newforma if you don't know what you're doing?
That's a good question. I'm not aware of any increase in file size. I mean, the file size that we linked, the actual model that we linked up to Newforma Project Center was, just a model that I picked off of the network. So whatever size that model is, that's the model that we're working with. I'm not aware of any additions where it's cobbling on more information to make that model, let's say, twice the size that it currently is now. I'm not aware of any of that, but I'll do a verification on that. Let me just make a note here.
Johnny, what Newforma is doing is just tapping into the database of the model. It's not really adding significant file size to the model. So it's not really adding any elements, therefore not adding file size.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What would be the best way to categorize these markups if you wanted to delineate markups for consultants versus in-house markups?
Let's see. As far as your consultants go, I mean, the markups that I demonstrated to you, that mechanism is only available if you're an internal user. Now, it's not to say that files in Newforma can't be marked up. As far as an external person goes, any of that kind of information that they access would be through the website typically. That's where they log into the website to see information. So if they're looking at, well, and I'm thinking through this as I go because I don't know how you're communicating with your consultants today. I'm assuming that, I mean, you tell me, do you send them the model? Do they have the model to look at, or are you just only wanting to send them kind of snapshots of the data like I was showing you how you could do that a moment ago?
We send them the model, but it would be nice to focus their attention on things we would want them to modify.
Yeah. And when I did that markup process using that snapshot, you saw how that took me and dropped that into Outlook. So sending them emails with basically a cropped out image of what's in the model that you want them to make changes to, would that work in that instance?
Could you, let's say, assign an action item to an element and then do a markup and assign that markup to that action item? think that might be the way to do it.
You could. The related items area allows you to do that. Let me just go back to Newforma for just a moment and point out a couple of things here, because I talked about markups when we were looking at this particular document. So again, if I take this PDF and open it with the Newforma viewer, if I've marked up this item, I can go up here to this Save button on the toolbar and save it. If I'm wanting to create essentially a project record and where someone can go back and refer back to this later, then I definitely want to save these markup sessions. And from here, I can list different members, team members that I want to be associated with this particular markup. So Bob Welder is an external person. So I'm going to go ahead and link Bob in here. There's a place where I can type some remarks, and then there's a related items tab where I can relate this to, and if you look down at the very bottom, relate to another project item, then I have an option of then picking these other activity centers. So in this case, I'm picking the action item, and then which action item am I going to associate this to? So this is what I think you just asked about, is the ability to do that.
Great.
Okay. And that's one of the big things, if you haven't uncovered it yet, this whole related items tab that exists across a lot of different documents lets you kind of build or weave things together, you know, to tell the story in the background. Now, when I do go ahead,
we got one more question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So when you make a PDF, does it also work with Clarity? In the sense that if you already upload a file and then you make a markup, does it already upload the new like the new revisions, or do you have to re-upload the file?
Yeah, they're not related. Let me answer that question. They're not related, but you can, after you create the PDF with Clarity, you can associate that PDF with Newforma. Okay, Clarity and Newforma have no association other than after you create the PDFs with Clarity, you can then bring them into Newforma. Okay.
Yep.
Now, the last thing I wanted to point out about markups, I just went through the process of marking up something and I saved the markup. It was not mandatory for me to save the markup. In the case of the snapshot and things that we were doing earlier, that was just kind of a point in time way for me to just push data out to somebody, but I didn't save it. I just used that Newforma viewer as a tool to create that data that I'm sending out. When I save a markup, you can always come back to this Markup Sessions Activity Center, and if I click, that's going to show me a log of the different markups that have been saved within the system. So there's the markup that I just created a moment ago, and I do have the ability to then, after a point, modify that particular markup and even close a markup out, or even assign some keywords to that make it easy for me to find these. So not only is the markup associated to the file, but it also gets saved in this log so that I don't even have to know which file was marked up. I can come over here and look through this list of markups to locate a particular markup. Any other questions? So I'll just review just a moment. So that, again, you've got all that data sitting out there in the Revit model. What we're going to do is take those Revit sheets, push them to document control. By pushing them to document control, internal and external users will be able to see these in the website as record documents. If I want external people to be able to see these files, I do need to go through the step of issuing those record documents. Internal users can see these files in a draft mode. As far as using the Plans app goes, by populating document control with record documents, I can then go out into the field using my iPad and open up these drawing sheets and work with them. If I'm an external user, I can only do that. I can only do that with the Plans app if these sheets have been issued. We also looked at how we were able to populate this spatial index information, which kind of goes hand in hand with my ability to create punch list items. Then we looked at action items being created in association with an element within that particular model. So hopefully these areas will give you some accountability, tracking ability, some efficiencies, instead of dealing with a lot of different emails for keeping up with that kind of information. You now have got the logs to track these action items, and people can go into an action item and update it, give you a % complete on where they are with that particular item. Let me point out one last thing about an action item that might be helpful for you. There is, again, this % complete that I mentioned here, so somebody could do an update on that particular item. And then if I come down and look at, there's a date where I can put in, there's also a status up here. I think sometimes it's a little confusing on this action item. What's the difference between completed and action complete? So if you've assigned me this action item, when I complete it, I'm going to come in and indicate that I've completed this task. If you're the one that assigned me the item, you're going to come in and after reviewing what I've completed, then you can mark this item as action complete. That's why there's kind of a two-step complete sequence here. So just in case you've wondered about that or you come across that later, just keep that in mind. Any other questions?
Are there plans in the future to make the things that become portable, such as the plans and the punch list and all that, available to Microsoft-based devices, or is it just only going to be Apple-based?
Talking about the Surface primarily?
Yes, sir.
We're working on that. I'll check with product management and see where we are on that last iteration around that. We've got a lot of development going on currently around a lot of different initiatives. I think first when we started going in the mobile direction, the business kind of told us where to go, and it seems to be an Apple-dominated market out there with iPads. Although we do have a few Android apps, but the challenge with why we're at more of an Apple-based shop versus Android is Android's got over 2,000 different combinations of hardware and software, whereas Apple, you're just dealing with less than 10 operating systems. Surface was just kind of a late coming player to that market, and so I'll just have to see where we are. I'll talk to our product manager and see what I can give you on an update. I mean, I'm hearing this quite regularly. A lot of people are going ahead and have moved in that direction. So let me just find out where we're at, and so I can give you a kind of a firm on where we are with that. So I'll push that back to Charlie as well. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, hopefully this will give you a starting place to go ahead and start pushing some of that information so that people can use it without it being a very manual process to load some of that data. And I'm sure there'll be questions and things as you go along, and just let us know what you come up against, and I'll get some answers back to Charlie on these other couple of points. And I think that's all I had for you at this time.
All right. Anybody else got questions before we let him go?
Thank
Great.
you.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rick.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
All right.
That's all. Maybe I just